They gave my brother the family business and told me to understand. I said completely, built my own company. Then they came begging me to save him from bankruptcy. My parents handed over our family HVAC business to my golden child brother, even though I had been running the place in every way that mattered for 8 years. 2 years after that decision, they were begging me to save him from bankruptcy, and by then, I had already built something of my own. I am 34, the oldest of two sons. My younger brother Colin is 29, and he has been the favorite since the day he was born. It was never subtle. Different rules, different expectations, different consequences, different everything. Growing up, I had a 10 p.m. curfew until I moved out at 23. Colin had no curfew at all by the time he was 16. I had to keep a B average to keep my car privileges. Colin failed 2 classes during his senior year and still got a brand new truck for graduation. I worked summers at Dad's HVAC company starting when I was 14, learning the trade from the ground up. Colin spent his summers at the lake house with his friends. The favoritism was so obvious that even extended family noticed. Once, when I was 17, my Uncle Ray pulled me aside at a barbecue and said my parents were setting Colin up to fail by never making him accountable for anything. At the time, I did not fully understand how right he was. It just took longer than anyone expected for the truth to catch up with all of us. My parents owned Morrison Heating and Cooling, a mid-sized HVAC company serving the greater Phoenix metro area. Dad started it 30 years ago and built it from a one-truck operation into a company with 12 vehicles and 23 employees. When things were running smoothly, annual revenue was about $3.2 million. By the time I was 22, I had worked every position in that company. I started as a helper, hauling equipment and cleaning job sites. Then I became an apprentice installer, then a lead installer. I got my contractor's license and started running service calls on my own. Eventually, I became the de facto operations manager, even though Dad never officially gave me the title or the pay bump that should have come with it. Colin went to college on my parents' dime. State school. Business degree. He barely scraped through with a 2.6 gigapascals. During those 4 years, he came home maybe 3 times, and he never once stopped by the shop to learn the business. But that did not matter. In my parents' eyes, he was getting educated, while I was just doing HVAC work. That double standard burned, but I loved the work. There was something satisfying about diagnosing a complicated system problem, fixing it the right way, and knowing a family would not have to sweat through another Phoenix summer. And I was good at it, really good. Customers asked for me by name when they needed service calls. I built relationships with general contractors who trusted my estimates and knew I would deliver quality work on schedule. When Colin graduated, Dad threw a huge party at the country club. He rented out the entire banquet room and invited everyone from the Chamber of Commerce. The whole thing looked like a formal business celebration, except nobody had told me it was supposed to be formal. I came straight from a job site, still in my work clothes, and stood in the back while Colin stood up front in a new suit, soaking up everyone's attention. Dad gave a speech about how proud he was that his son was now educated in business principles and ready to take the company into the modern era. I stood there listening, filthy and tired from actual work, while Colin smiled like he had accomplished something inside a company he had not spent a single day learning. He did not know how a heat exchanger worked. He did not know what refrigerant we used in residential units. He did not know the difference between theory and the brutal reality of running crews in Phoenix heat. That should have been my first real clue about where everything was headed. Colin joined the company the following Monday with the title of Business Development Manager and a salary that was $20,000 more than what I was making after 8 years. His job description was intentionally vague, something about identifying growth opportunities and building strategic partnerships. In practice, it meant Colin showed up around 10 a.m., left by 3 p.m., and spent most of his time taking potential clients to lunch on the company card. Those potential clients were usually his college buddies or random business owners who had no real need for commercial HVAC services, but were happy to enjoy a free meal. Meanwhile, I handled the actual operations. I scheduled technicians, managed inventory, negotiated with suppliers, dealt with difficult customers, trained new installers, and still ran service calls when we were short-staffed. I arrived at 6 a.m. to prep trucks for the day, and I often stayed past 7 p.m., dealing with whatever crisis had erupted. Dad started pulling me aside with that concerned look he used when he wanted me to absorb something unfair without complaining. He would say, "You know, Colin is still learning the business," and give him time to find his footing. Time to find his footing doing what? The guy did not know the difference between a compressor and a condenser coil. About 6 months into Colin's time at the company, We lost our biggest commercial client, a property management company that oversaw 47 apartment complexes across the metro area. They had been with us for 12 years. The account representative called me directly to explain why they were switching to a competitor. He said, "Nothing personal. Your work quality is still excellent, but your brother quoted us a maintenance contract that was 40% higher than market rate, then told us we were lucky to work with a premium service provider. We are not paying premium prices for attitude." I found out later that Colin had gone to the meeting unprepared. He had not reviewed their previous contract terms. He had not looked at market rates. He had basically tried to wing the entire thing based on business principles he half remembered from a pricing strategy class. That account had been worth roughly $280,000 a year. When I brought it up to Dad, he said Colin was still learning the sales process and that sometimes you had to lose a few to understand the game. We had not lost a few. We had lost $250,000 in reliable annual revenue because his golden boy had not bothered to do basic preparation. That became the pattern. Colin would create problems through incompetence, laziness, or arrogance. I would either fix those problems or absorb the consequences, and Dad would make excuses about learning curves and adjustment periods. The worst part was not even the favoritism anymore. It was watching Dad systematically ignore reality. Colin was objectively bad at every part of the business. But Dad had built this story in his head about his youngest son being naturally gifted at business leadership. Evidence did not matter. Results did not matter. Only the story mattered. Mom was no better. She would gush about how handsome Colin looked in his business casual clothes, how professional he sounded on phone calls, and how proud she was that he was following in his father's footsteps. Never mind that Dad had built the company through brutal 16-hour days and hands-on technical expertise. Colin's version of following those footsteps involved catered lunches and leaving early to play golf. My wife Brooke saw the writing on the wall before I did. She works as a project manager for a construction firm, so she understands how businesses actually operate, not just how people pretend they operate. One night after a family dinner, where Dad had spent almost an hour praising Colin's innovative thinking about some marketing idea he had clearly stolen from a podcast, Brooke looked at me and said, "They are going to give him the company, and when they do, you need to already have your exit plan ready." I did not want to believe her. Despite everything, I had built that company alongside my dad. I knew every customer, every supplier, and every employee. The business felt as much mine as his, even if my name was not on the ownership papers. But Brooke kept pushing me to prepare, just in case. We started saving more aggressively. I began documenting my contributions to the company, projects I had managed, clients I had brought in, systems I had improved. I got copies of customer testimonials that specifically mentioned me by name. I quietly started building relationships with key suppliers and contractors, independent of Morrison Heating and Cooling. The conversation happened on a Tuesday afternoon. I remember because I had just finished a particularly difficult installation at a commercial building downtown, retrofitting an outdated system in 110-degree heat. I was filthy, exhausted, and looking forward to a cold drink and a shower. Then Dad called me into his office. Mom was there too, which was unusual. Colin was conspicuously absent. Dad started with, "We need to talk about succession planning." My stomach dropped, but I kept my face neutral. He went into a long speech about legacy and family continuity. He talked about how he had always dreamed of passing the business down to his sons. He talked about how important it was to have fresh vision and new energy leading the company into the future. Then he finally got to the point. "Your mother and I have decided that Colin will take over as president and majority owner of Morrison Heating and Cooling." The room went quiet. I just looked at him, waiting for the rest. Mom added, "You understand why, don't you? Colin has the education and the business background. He is better positioned to lead." Lead what? A company he did not understand? Employees he had never worked beside? Clients he could not identify if they walked through the door? I kept my voice level and asked, "What about me?" Dad shifted in his chair. "Well, of course you will stay on. You are valuable to operations. Colin will need your technical expertise as he transitions into leadership. So I would continue doing the actual work, while Colin took the credit and collected the owner's profits." "Perfect," I repeated slowly. "He'll need my expertise." Dad looked relieved, like I was finally understanding. "Exactly. You two will make a great team. Colin handles the business side. You handle the technical side." Except Colin did not handle anything on the business side, other than taking credit and spending money. But pointing that out would have started an argument I had already lost before I ever walked into that office. I asked, "When does this happen?" "We are planning the transition for 6 months from now," Dad said. That gives Colin time to get more familiar with operations. He used his reasonable voice, the one that implied any disagreement would make me unreasonable. 6 months. They were giving me 6 months' notice that I would be working for my less qualified, less experienced, less capable younger brother. Okay, I said. They both looked surprised. I think they had expected me to argue or get emotional, Mom repeated. Okay, I said. I understand. And I did understand. I understood that they had made their choice, and nothing I said would change it. I understood that all the years of work, all the relationships I had built, and all the knowledge I had accumulated did not matter as much as their fantasy version of Colin's potential. I also understood that I was not going to stick around and watch it implode from the inside. That night, I told Brooke what had happened. She was not surprised. She was just angry for me. What are you going to do? She asked. Start my own company. When? Tomorrow. She smiled, but not a happy smile. It was more like the smile of a warrior getting ready for battle. Let's do it, she said. We spent that evening mapping out the plan. I had enough savings to cover startup costs and about 3 months of living expenses. Brooke's income would cover our mortgage and basic bills. I knew the residential HVAC market inside and out. I had relationships with suppliers who would give me credit terms based on my reputation. I had a contractor's license in my own name. The main risk was the non-compete clause, but I had checked my employment contract years earlier during a slow week. Dad had hired some bargain attorney to draft it, and the non-compete was absurdly broad and almost certainly unenforceable. It claimed I could not work in any business related to climate control anywhere in Arizona for 5 years. That would have prevented me from getting any job in my field, and there was no way that would hold up in court. Plus, Dad would have to actually sue me to enforce it. That would mean admitting in public court filings that his oldest son had left to start a competing business rather than work for his younger brother. The embarrassment alone would probably keep him from taking legal action. By midnight, Brooke and I had a basic framework. I would start a residential-focused HVAC company targeting the higher-end market Morrison Heating and Cooling had always underserved. I would offer premium service with premium pricing, the kind of work where quality mattered more than being the cheapest bid. The next morning, I started making calls. The first call was to my Uncle Ray, who had always been straight with me. He owned a successful electrical contracting business and knew everyone in the construction trades. When I explained the situation, he did not even sound surprised. About time, he said. I've been wondering how long you would let them treat you like hired help. What do you need? Advice, connections, maybe some referrals once I get up and running. You got it. I'll spread the word that you're starting your own shop. Most of the contractors I know already prefer working with you anyway. They just call Morrison because that is where you work. The next call was to Linda, our primary supply vendor. She ran a commercial HVAC supply house and had always been honest with me about industry relationships. I told her, I'm thinking about starting my own company. I need to know if I can get supplier credit based on my personal reputation rather than Morrison's account. She said, Honey, I have been waiting for this call for years. Your dad's account is only as good as it is because of you. Colin has been calling here trying to negotiate pricing on units he can't even properly identify. You want credit terms? I'll match whatever I'm giving Morrison, and your account rep will actually know what she's talking about. The calls continued. Contractors I had built relationships with over the years. Building managers who had requested me personally for service calls, former Morrison employees who had left because they could not stand working with Colin. Every conversation went the same way. People were not just willing to work with me, they were excited about it. It turned out my reputation was much stronger than I had realized. Within a week, I had commitments for startup work worth about $75,000. It's not huge money, but enough to prove the concept and cover initial expenses. I kept working at Morrison Heating and Cooling like nothing had changed. I showed up early. I stayed late. I handled difficult jobs. I trained the newer installers. I just stopped volunteering for extra projects or going above and beyond to fix Colin's mistakes. Dad noticed, but he attributed it to me being moody about the succession plan. He pulled me aside to give me a speech about being professional and supporting Colin during the transition period. This is hard for him too, Dad said. He knows he has big shoes to fill. Big shoes to fill. Colin could not fill a pair of children's shoes at that point, but sure, I'm being completely professional, I told him, and that was true. I was doing exactly my job description, nothing more, nothing less. The problem was that for years, I had been doing my job, plus half of Colin's job, plus covering for Dad's declining involvement. Now I was just doing my job, and the cracks were starting to show. 3 months after the succession announcement, I filed incorporation papers for Coleman Climate Control. The name was intentional. It was professional enough for the high-end market I was targeting, but it was also my name. This was not some cute startup trying to sound bigger than it was. This was me, my skills, my reputation. Brooke helped design the logo and website. We positioned the company as a premium residential service, the kind of work where homeowners care more about quality than saving a few $100s. Our tagline was, "Expert service every time." Simple, direct, and a subtle dig at Morrison's inconsistent quality since Colin had gotten involved. I started taking small residential jobs on weekends. Nothing that violated my employment contract, just side work that let me test my systems and build a client base. Every job got done perfectly. Every customer got my personal cell number. Every installation came with a detailed explanation of the system and maintenance recommendations. Word spread fast in the upper middle-class neighborhoods I was targeting. Homeowners talked to each other. A good experience with a contractor gets mentioned at backyard barbecues, HOA meetings, and neighborhood group chats. Within 2 months of weekend work, I had a waiting list. In the 4th month after the succession announcement, I gave notice at Morrison Heating and Cooling. Dad was in a meeting when I submitted my resignation letter to the office manager, so I did not have to have the conversation immediately. The letter was professional and brief. Please accept this as my formal 2 weeks notice. I have accepted an opportunity that better aligns with my career goals. I am grateful for the experience and knowledge gained during my time here. Colin called me within an hour, panicked. What is this about resigning? Dad is going to lose it. I found another opportunity. What opportunity? Where are you going? Does it matter? Of course it matters. You can't just leave. We need you here. We. As if Colin had any actual stake in keeping operations running smoothly beyond making sure his own paycheck cleared. You'll figure it out, I said. You've got that business degree. This isn't funny. You know I'm still learning the technical side. That was the thing. He had been still learning for almost 2 years and had not bothered to actually learn anything. But that was no longer my problem. Dad called next, using his disappointed voice. We need to talk about this resignation. You're being emotional and making rash decisions. There is nothing emotional about it, I said. I have another opportunity. What opportunity? With who? I could have lied. I could have made up a job with a competitor in another state. But I was done pretending. I started my own company, Coleman Climate Control, residential service, premium market. The silence on the other end was so complete that for a second, I thought the call had dropped. Then Dad said, "You started a competing business? I started my own business. It will compete to the extent that both companies serve customers in the same geographic area. That violates your non-compete." Actually, it doesn't. Your non-compete is unenforceable. Any employment lawyer would tell you that. But you are welcome to try taking legal action if you want to explain to a judge why your oldest son left to start his own company rather than work for his younger brother. Another long silence. Finally, he said, "I thought you were better than this." "I thought you were better than this too, Dad. I guess we were both wrong." I hung up before he could respond. The next 2 weeks were tense. I finished out my time at Morrison Heating and Cooling because I am not the kind of person who leaves coworkers in the lurch. I trained the senior installer on some of the systems I had designed. I documented my customer relationships as much as I could without technically violating company policy. I made sure the transition would be as smooth as possible for the employees who had done nothing wrong. Colin tried acting buddy-buddy, suggesting we talk things through and work something out. When that did not work, he tried guilt, then anger. Then he went right back to buddy-buddy. The man had no consistency because he had no actual position, beyond wanting things to stay comfortable for him. Dad shifted between cold silence and passive-aggressive comments about loyalty and family responsibility. Mom sent me a long text about how disappointed she was in my choices and how I was breaking my father's heart. The extended family had opinions too. Uncle Ray sent me a bottle of expensive liquor with a note that simply said, "Congratulations." My aunt called to say I had always been the smart one, and she was glad I was finally standing up for myself. Mom's sister left a voicemail about respecting my parents' wishes and not being selfish. On my last day, I cleaned out my desk, turned in my keys and the company truck, and walked out without ceremony. I had spent 12 years of my life in that building. I had learned everything I knew about the trade there. I had built relationships and systems that helped make the company successful. Walking away should have been harder than it was. But mostly, I felt relief. Coleman Climate Control officially launched the following Monday. I already had enough work lined up to stay busy for 6 weeks. Brooke handled business operations from home, including scheduling, invoicing, and customer service. I did the technical work with help from 2 subcontractors I had worked with before, both of whom were happy to partner on projects. The first few months were intense. I worked 6 0-hour weeks, doing everything from high-end installations to emergency service calls. But every job was mine. Every satisfied customer was someone I had earned through quality work, not through a family name. Every dollar of profit went toward building something that belonged to me. Word kept spreading. The referral rate was insane. About 70% of new clients came from recommendations by previous customers. The neighborhoods I was targeting appreciated quality work and were willing to pay for it. I was not trying to be the cheapest option. I was trying to be the best option. 6 months after launching, I hired my first employee, a young guy fresh out of trade school who reminded me of myself at that age. He was eager to learn, willing to work hard, and grateful to have someone who would actually train him properly. His name was Austin, and he soaked up knowledge like a sponge. During his first week, he asked me, "Why did you hire me? I've only got classroom experience." I told him, "Because you showed up on time for the interview, asked intelligent questions, and did not act like the job was beneath you. Plus, you actually read the equipment manual I sent you. That was a test." He blinked. "That was a test?" "Everything is a test," I said. "You passed." By month 9, Coleman Climate Control had steady revenue of about $40,000 a month. That was not huge compared with Morrison's $250,000 monthly average, but it was impressive for a startup. More importantly, my overhead was much lower. No bloated administrative staff, no country club memberships, no catered lunches, no executives collecting paychecks while not understanding the work. I started hearing things through the industry grapevine. Morrison Heating and Cooling was struggling. Service calls were taking longer because experienced installers had to compensate for poor scheduling. Estimates were getting rejected because Colin was either wildly overpricing or underpricing depending on his mood. Employee turnover was climbing because the work environment had become chaotic, but that was their problem now, not mine. In year 2, things accelerated. I hired 3 more installers and a dedicated service technician. I leased a small office and workshop space. I bought 2 trucks and had them wrapped with the Coleman Climate Control logo. Brooke moved from handling operations at home to running a real office with real systems and processes. We were becoming a real company, not just me and a few subcontractors. The high-end residential market responded exactly the way I hoped it would. Homeowners in the $500,000 plus price range did not want the cheapest option. They wanted someone who would show up on time, explain the system clearly, do quality work, and be available if problems came up later. That was our entire business model, and it worked. By the end of year 2, Coleman Climate Control was bringing in $75,000 in monthly revenue with healthy profit margins. We had built a reputation for premium service that commanded premium pricing. Our online reviews were almost all 5 stars. General contractors were calling us for high-end new construction projects. I was not just surviving without Morrison Heating and Cooling. I was thriving. That was when Dad called. I was on a job site installing a new system in a custom home when my phone rang. I had not spoken to either parent in close to 18 months. The number came up as Dad's cell. My first instinct was to let it go to voicemail, but curiosity got the better of me. I answered in my professional voice. "This is Coleman. It's your father." His voice sounded different, smaller somehow. "What can I do for you? We need to talk. Can you come by the house this evening?" "I'm pretty busy. What is this about?" There was silence. Then he said, "It's about the business. Morrison's business. We are having some difficulties, and thought you might be willing to discuss solutions." Solutions. Interesting word choice. What kind of difficulties? "I would rather discuss it in person. Please. This is important." The please was what got me. My dad did not say please often. When he did, it meant things were serious. "I can stop by around 7, I told him. I spent the rest of the day wondering what the meeting was really about. The grapevine had already told me Morrison was struggling, but I had not heard specifics. Part of me was curious. Another part of me was preparing to be angry if this was some attempt to guilt me into coming back. Brooke's advice was simple. Go listen. Do not commit to anything. And remember, they made their choice. I showed up at 7:03 p.m. The house looked the same. A nice suburban property in a good neighborhood. The kind of place that quietly announced, "Successful small business owner." Dad's truck was in the driveway. The lights were on inside. Mom answered the door. She looked older than I remembered. Tired in a way that had nothing to do with physical age. "Thank you for coming," she said quietly. Dad was in the living room. Colin was there too, which I had not expected. He looked like he had aged 5 years in the 2 since I had last seen him. Dark circles under his eyes. Hunched on the couch like a kid waiting for a lecture. "Thanks for coming," Dad started. "Sit down, please." I stayed standing. What is going on? Dad exchanged a look with Mom. Morrison Heating and Cooling is in trouble, he said. Serious trouble. We have been losing clients. Cash flow is tight. We are looking at potentially closing down if we cannot turn things around. How bad is it? Revenue is down about 60% from 2 years ago. We have had to lay off 12 people. We lost our line of credit with the bank. Suppliers are demanding cash on delivery because we have been late on invoices. I looked at Colin. He would not meet my eyes. What happened? I asked. Dad started explaining. Clients leaving, employees quitting, equipment breaking down, all the symptoms, none of the cause. Finally, I interrupted. What happened? I looked directly at Colin this time. He looked up, defensive. It's not my fault. The market changed. Competition increased. Labor costs went up. The market did not change that much in 2 years, I said. What did you do? I did not do anything. I have been trying to run the company the way Dad built it. Dad built it by knowing the technical work and treating customers right. What did you actually do? Mom cut in. This isn't helpful. We are not here to assign blame. Then why am I here? Dad took a breath. We need help. Financial help. We need about $180,000 to get current on bills, cover payroll for 3 months, and buy enough inventory to take on new jobs. We are asking if you would be willing to invest in the company as a partner. The audacity was almost impressive. They wanted me to bail out the company they had deliberately given to Colin instead of me. The company they had specifically excluded me from owning. I said, let me make sure I understand. You want me to invest $180,000 in a failing company that you deliberately gave to Colin instead of me? It's not failing, Colin protested. We are just going through a rough patch. A rough patch that cost you 60% of revenue and 12 employees. The industry is competitive. I am in the same industry. I am not losing clients. That shut him up. Dad tried again. This is still a family business. We thought you might want to help preserve what your grandfather started. Grandfather. The man who had built a small local company. Dad had expanded it. I had modernized and systematized it. And Colin had apparently run it into the ground through sheer incompetence. I asked, what would this partnership look like? Dad looked hopeful. We would give you 25% ownership in exchange for the investment and for helping get operations back on track. I did the math in my head. They were valuing a failing company at $720,000, which was delusional. Based on what Dad had just described, Morrison probably had about $200,000 in actual assets and negative working capital. I said, let me think about it. Dad pressed, how long do you need? I'll let you know. The drive home was quiet. I was not exactly angry. I was more amazed that they thought this would work. They thought they could treat me like a disposable employee for years, give the company to Colin, watch him destroy it, and then expect me to write a check to fix everything. Brooke was waiting up when I got home. I explained the whole situation. What are you going to do? She asked. Say no, obviously. How are you going to say no? That was the real question. I could send a simple text declining. I could call Dad and explain I was not interested. I could ghost them completely and let them figure it out. Instead, I did something better. The next morning, I called Dad. About that partnership discussion, I said. Yes, he said quickly. He sounded eager. I'm going to pass. But I did put together some information that might help. What kind of information? Business resources. Contact information for commercial lenders. Restructuring consultants. That kind of thing. I'm sending it over now. I had spent an hour that morning compiling a list of resources for struggling small businesses. Bank contacts who specialized in distressed company loans. Business consultants who did operational assessments. Even bankruptcy attorneys who offered free initial consultations. The email was professional and helpful. Exactly the kind of thing someone would send if they genuinely wanted to help, but could not invest personally. The subject line was, Resources for Morrison Heating and Cooling. I also included some general advice. Key things struggling HVAC companies need to focus on. Technical quality, customer service, and operational efficiency. The owner needs to understand the technical work well enough to ensure quality. Customer relationships matter more than price. Efficient operations keep costs manageable. Consider bringing in experienced operations management if current leadership lacks technical expertise. That last line was the kill shot. It was professional enough that I could claim I was trying to help. It was specific enough that anyone reading it would understand exactly what I was saying. I was basically saying Colin did not know what he was doing. Dad called back that afternoon. I got your email, he said. This is not what we were hoping for. I understand, but I am not in a position to invest right now. Coleman Climate Control is still growing and needs our capital. You are really going to let us fail? I am not letting you do anything, Dad. You made decisions about Morrison's future. Now you are dealing with the consequences of those decisions. That is how business works. This is your family legacy. No, it is your business. You made that clear when you gave it to Colin instead of me. I am building my own legacy now. He tried arguing. He brought up family responsibility, loyalty, how selfish I was being. I let him wind down before I responded. Dad, you chose Colin to lead Morrison Heating and Cooling because you thought he would be better at it than me. This is him being better at it. If you think you made a mistake, that is between you and him. Then I hung up, feeling lighter than I had in years. Over the next few months, I heard updates through Uncle Ray and industry contacts. Morrison Heating and Cooling tried to get a business loan, but could not qualify. The bank would not extend credit to a company with declining revenue and operational problems. Dad tried to sell the business, but he could not find buyers willing to pay anything close to what he thought it was worth. Finally, they filed for bankruptcy protection. They liquidated the equipment. They settled with creditors for pennies on the dollar. Then, after 30 years, Morrison Heating and Cooling closed its doors. As far as I heard, Colin moved out of state to work in his wife's family's restaurant business. Something in hospitality, where his lack of technical skills would be less of a problem. Dad took it hard. He had spent 3 decades building that company, and watching it collapse hurt, no matter whose fault it actually was. Mom was angry at me, at the situation, and at the universe. She sent a few nasty messages about how I had chosen money over family. I did not respond. There was nothing to say. They had made their choice. I had made mine, and the natural consequences played out exactly as anyone paying attention could have predicted. Uncle Ray summed it up best over coffee a few months after Morrison closed. He said, "Your dad spent so many years believing Colin was special that he could not see Colin was actually just average. And in business, average is not good enough when you have someone exceptional standing right there, waiting for a chance." Coleman Climate Control kept growing. In year 3, we expanded into light commercial work, small retail spaces, office buildings, and similar projects. We hired an administrative assistant to help Brooke with office operations. We added 2 more service technicians and another installer. Austin, my first employee, was now training new hires. The kid had become a solid technician with good customer service skills. He had been with me almost from the beginning, and he understood the culture we were building. Revenue reached $95,000 a month with consistent growth projections. We were nowhere near Morrison's peak numbers yet, but we were profitable, stable, and building something sustainable. More importantly, the company culture was healthy. People showed up wanting to do good work. Customers trusted us. Suppliers respected us. About 6 months after Morrison closed, I got a surprising call from one of their former major clients, a property management company with 43 apartment complexes. They had gone with another contractor after Morrison folded, but they were not happy with the service. The account manager told me, "We kept hoping you would expand into commercial work. Your reputation is excellent. Would Coleman Climate Control be interested in bidding on our maintenance contract?" We got the contract. It turned out that being consistently reliable and technically competent was more valuable than being the cheapest bid. Who knew? That contract was worth $320,000 annually, more than Morrison's old contract with the same company. We hired 3 more people just to handle that account properly. By year 4, Coleman Climate Control was a legitimate competitor in the Phoenix metro HVAC market. We had 19 employees, 8 trucks, a real office with a workshop, and revenue around $135,000 a month. We had built a reputation as the quality option. Not the cheapest, not the biggest, but the company you called when you wanted the job done right. I ran into Colin at a restaurant. Completely random encounter. Brooke and I were there for dinner, and he was there with who I assumed was his wife and another couple. We made eye contact across the room. He looked away quickly, then seemed to change his mind and came over to our table. "Hey," he said awkwardly. "Hey, I heard your company is doing really well." "It's going good. How are you?" "Good. Working with my wife's family now. Restaurant management. Different industry, but interesting." "That's good." Silence. He shifted his weight, clearly wanting to say something but not knowing how. Then he said, "Look, I know things got bad with Morrison. I just wanted to say I'm sorry about how everything went down." The apology surprised me, not because it changed anything, but because Colin was not usually the type to admit fault. "I appreciate that," I said. "For what it's worth, you were right. I was not ready to run that company. I did not understand what I did not know until it was too late." I said, "It takes guts to admit that." "Yeah, well, It is easier now that the consequences are over. He gave a small, awkward nod. Anyway, I won't interrupt your dinner. I just wanted to say that. He walked back to his table. Brooke looked at me questioningly. He apologized, I said. Did you accept? I acknowledged it. That is different. She nodded. Fair enough. The truth was, I did not really hold anger toward Colin anymore. He had been put in a position he was not qualified for by parents who refused to see his limitations. That was not entirely his fault. He should have had the self-awareness to recognize it and refuse the responsibility. But 9-year-olds who have been told they are special their whole lives rarely have that kind of insight. The anger I had felt had changed into something else over the years. Not forgiveness exactly, but acceptance. They made their choices. I made mine. We were all living with the results. Colin was working in restaurants. Dad's business had collapsed. I was running a successful company I had built myself. That was just how things were. Last month, Dad called. It was the first time we had spoken in close to 3 years. He did not ease into it. He did not start with small talk. He just said, I wanted to let you know I'm proud of what you've built. Thanks, I said. I made a mistake with the succession plan and with how I treated you. I see that now. Yeah, I said. You did. Can we get together sometime? Talk? I thought about it. Part of me wanted to say no and keep the clean break that had worked so well. But another part of me understood that life is too short to hold grudges forever. Maybe, I said. I'll think about it. That's fair. We have not gotten together yet. Maybe we will eventually. Maybe the relationship can be salvaged into something different than it was before. But if it cannot, I am okay with that too.